Julian's world was a universe of gears, where every tick was a battle against the single, flawed second that took her away. His workshop, a quiet sanctum of polished brass and gleaming steel, was more than just a place of work. It was a fortress against the chaos of memory. Here, every timepiece was a testament to his control, his meticulous precision, a shield against a world that had betrayed him. He could account for every millisecond, every rotation, every microscopic component, because in a world of such predictable, perfect order, there was no room for the unpredictable flaw that had shattered his life. This fortress of ticking was his atonement, a silent, desperate prayer for a second chance that could never come. Before we begin, let me ask you, have you ever carried a guilt so heavy it silenced your entire life? If stories like this speak to you, subscribe and don't miss what's coming. The workshop was a living museum of his grief. On a workbench in the corner, covered by a dust sheet, sat a watch that remained untouched. It was her watch, a small, elegant piece he had made for her years ago. Its hands were frozen at 3:17 p.m., the precise moment of the accident. He refused to fix it, to let its hands move on, because to do so would be to admit that time had in fact moved on without her. Instead, he worked on 100 others, each one a distraction from the one he couldn't face. His hands, though steady, were haunted by the memory of hers, the ones that had held, the metronome he had given her, the ones that were now silent. Julian's existence had become a ritual of denial. He would wake before dawn, the silence of the city his only companion. He would brew coffee, its bitter scent filling the air, and then he would begin. He would select a broken watch, a discarded grandfather clock, and he would begin to work. His focus was absolute, his movements fluid and precise. The world outside his window, with its rushing cars and laughing people, was a blur. He saw them, but he did not feel them. He was an observer, a ghost within his own life, a man who lived only in the rhythm of the clocks he could control. He never spoke of her, not to the few customers who came to him, not to himself. Her name was a silent word on his tongue, a ghost that haunted the edges of his consciousness. Her music, once the soundtrack to his life, was now a painful echo he actively suppressed. The river was a mirror, reflecting his failures back at him, he often thought. As he stared out at the city, seeing his own reflection in the blur of passing life, he was a man made of glass and gears, meticulously crafted but broken at his core. His nights were a different kind of torture. He would sit for hours, bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp, a small contraption on his workbench. It was his impossible project, a clock that could stop time, a machine that could, for one single perfect second, hold the universe still. He knew it was a foolish, unattainable, a goal, but he worked on it relentlessly, a desperate prayer in the language of physics and mechanics. He believed that if he could just pause time, even for a moment, he could somehow reach back into the past and change that single, fatal second that took her away. He didn't know it then, but time, like a wound, had its own way of healing. It didn't stop for him, but it was about to bring something into his world that would force him to face the imperfections he had so meticulously tried to fix. A different rhythm was coming, one that was not perfect but was, in its own way, alive. The workshop was a microcosm of his grief. Every ticking clock, every pendulum swing was a beat in a song of his own making, a melody of control and precision designed to drown out the painful dissonance of her absence. The air was thick with the scent of oil and old wood, a scent that had once been comforting but was now a prison. He knew every piece, every gear, every spring by heart. He could disassemble a complex chronograph with his eyes closed, his fingers moving with an almost spiritual grace. But what he couldn't do was rewind the clock of his own life. His loneliness was a tangible presence, a heavy coat he wore through every silent hour. He would eat his meals at the workbench, a cold sandwich and a cup of lukewarm tea, the clatter of his spoon on the mug, the only sound in a world of rhythmic ticking. He had long ago stopped answering the phone, stopped checking the mail for anything but bills. The world outside had faded into a series of blurred lights and distant sounds. He was a man trapped in a bubble of time, watching the world move on while he remained perfectly, painfully still. The city outside was a cruel contrast to his ordered world. Taxis honked, people laughed on their way to dinner, and streetlights hummed with a life he no longer understood. He saw a young couple walking by, hand in hand, and a wave of nausea washed over him. It was a reminder of a time when he too had walked with someone, when his world had been filled with music and laughter, not the relentless, unforgiving rhythm of his clocks. He turned away from the window, his chest a tight knot of regret. He began to notice a new sound, a rhythmic clatter that was not his own. It came from the wall across the street, a large blank canvas that was now the site of a new street art project. A young woman, her hair a splash of bright pink, was up on a scaffold, a can of spray paint in her hand. The sound of the ball rattling inside the can, the whisper of paint on concrete. It was an intrusion into his carefully constructed silence. He found himself watching her, a curiosity he hadn't felt in years, a tiny crack in the dam of his isolation. The mural began to take shape, a splash of chaotic, vibrant color against the dreary grey of the brick. He tried to ignore it, to focus on the delicate balance of a watch escapement, but his eyes kept drifting to the wall. He saw a face emerge, a series of geometric shapes, and then a massive clock. But it wasn't a clock of his making. The hands were askew, the numbers were in the wrong places, and it was always, inexplicably, a few minutes behind. It was an affront to everything he believed in. He felt a surge of professional outrage. "It's a metaphor for a life lived out of sync," he muttered to himself, a pang of recognition stabbing through him. He couldn't stand the sight of the flawed timepiece. He felt a desperate urge to cross the street, to climb the scaffold, and to fix it. He wanted to straighten the hands, to put the numbers in their correct order. It was the same feeling he had when a broken watch came into his hands, the same need to restore a broken rhythm. But this was different. This was not a clock made of brass and steel, but one made of paint and feeling. It was a reflection of the imperfection he had been trying so hard to outrun. He watched her work, the artist. She moved with a fluid, confident grace, her head bobbing to music only she could hear. She wasn't fighting the imperfections of the clock. She was embracing them, making them part of the art. He found himself mesmerized, and for the first time in years, a question echoed in the quiet of his workshop. What if being out of sync was not a flaw, but an act of creation? If this story has already touched you, imagine what's still to come. Subscribe and don't miss the next one. One morning, as Julian opened his workshop door, he found a small paper bag hanging from the handle. Inside was a warm cup of coffee and a fresh croissant. There was no note, no explanation, just a simple, silent gift. He looked across the street and saw the artist, a flash of pink hair, giving him a small, shy wave before she turned back to her mural. It was an act of kindness so simple, so unexpected, that it felt like a violation of his carefully maintained routine. He felt a jolt of something he hadn't felt in a long time, confusion, followed by a flicker of warmth. The next day it was a sandwich. The day after that, a small thermos of hot tea. Each gift was timed perfectly, arriving just as the morning chill began to fade. It was a rhythm he hadn't anticipated, a new beat that was not of his own making. The food tasted different, better than the cold meals he prepared for himself. It was a small, almost insignificant gesture, but it was the first thing in years that was not tied to his grief. It was an act of pure, unadulterated human connection. He began to watch her more closely. He saw her working tirelessly, her movements a kind of dance. He saw the small, delicate details she was adding to the massive mural, and he saw the clock, her impossible clock, which continued to be slightly behind. He found himself wondering about her, about why she was there, and why she was doing this. He saw her pack up her things at the end of the day, her silhouette a stark and contrast to the vibrant colors she had created. He wanted to thank her, but he couldn't find the words. His voice, unused for so long, felt like a foreign instrument. One evening, he saw her packing up her gear, her movements slower than usual. He watched as she took out a small, worn object from her bag and looked at it with a pained expression. It was a small, broken metronome. A wave of recognition, sharp and sudden, cut through him. It was a vintage Wittner Tactel, the very model his wife had used for her music. He felt a pang of something he couldn't name, nostalgia, pain, and a terrifying curiosity. He saw her look up at him, her eyes catching his, and for a moment they were not strangers. They were two people, bound by an object of shared grief. She began to leave him notes with the gifts. They were short, simple, and unsigned. "You look tired? Take a break." Or, "The clock is a little bit of a mess, isn't it?" He found himself smiling at them, a small, genuine smile that felt foreign on his face. He felt a strange pull, a desire to respond, but he didn't know how. He was a man of actions, not words. He fixed things. He didn't communicate with them. One rainy afternoon, as Julian was lost in the intricate world of a pocket watch, he heard a light tap on his window. He looked up, and there she was, standing under a large umbrella, holding a small package. He opened the door and she smiled at him, a genuine, warm smile. "Hi," she said. "I'm Mia." Her voice was soft, but it cut through the ticking of his clocks. "This is for you. It's my aunt's. She always told me about her brilliant watchmaker friend. She said he could fix anything." Julian's breath caught in his throat. He looked at the package in her hands. It was the metronome he had seen before, but now he understood. It was his wife's. He felt a wave of dizzying emotion, confusion, shock, and a piercing, almost unbearable pain. The object, his wife's beloved metronome, felt impossibly heavy in his hands. He looked at Mia, at the quiet understanding in her eyes, and a truth, a painful, gut-wrenching truth, began to dawn on him. She knew. She had known all along. Mia's revelation shattered the glass fortress Julian had built around himself. The metronome felt like a shard of the past, sharp and unyielding, cutting through his defenses. He wanted to refuse it, to shut the door and return to the safety of his ticking world, but her eyes held a quiet, unshakable resolve. They were a mirror of her aunt's, his wife's, and he saw in them not pity, but an invitation to finally face the broken pieces of his life. He took the metronome from her. Its familiar weight, a painful echo of a life he had tried to forget. "Thank you," he managed, his voice a hoarse whisper. He spent the next few days in a state of agitated turmoil. The metronome sat on his workbench, an unwelcome intruder in his world of perfect clocks. Its broken pendulum, a symbol of a rhythm that had been lost, felt like a direct challenge to his entire existence. Every time he looked at it, he was flooded with memories. His wife, sitting at her piano, her face lit with concentration, the metronome's steady beat a counterpoint to her beautiful, chaotic music. The memories were not just painful, they were alive, a vibrant, terrifying reminder of what he had lost. He tried to work on other watches, but his hands trembled. He would drop a tiny screw, a delicate spring, something he had never done before. The perfect rhythmic ticking of his clocks felt like a mockery. They had not been able to save her. Their perfect rhythm had been useless against the single, fatal flaw. He felt a desperate need to work, to bury himself in the familiar comfort of gears and springs, but he couldn't. The metronome, a silent, immobile witness, held him captive. Mia continued her work across the street. He could hear her at all hours, the rattle of her spray paint can, the soft hum of music from her portable speaker. He found himself watching her, not with irritation, but with a growing fascination. Her mural, the imperfect clock, seemed to mock him, a constant reminder of the life he had so meticulously tried to control. He began to see the small, beautiful details she was adding, a tiny bird flying across the face of the clock, a flower blooming from one of the hands. It was a different kind of beauty, a beauty that was not born of precision, but of an acceptance of imperfection. One evening, unable to stand the silent accusation of the metronome, he reached for it. He held it in his hands, his fingers tracing the small nicks and scratches on its wooden surface. He saw his wife's initials carved into the wood with a tiny pin. He felt a wave of overwhelming emotion. It was not anger, not guilt, but a profound, gut-wrenching grief he had been suppressing for years. He allowed himself to feel it, to let the tears stream down his face, silent and hot. He was not a watchmaker then, not a man of gears and cogs, but a man who had loved and lost. The next morning he began to work on the metronome. His hands, though still shaky, moved with a different kind of purpose. This was not a fix born of control, but of love. He was not trying to atone for a past failure. He was trying to honor a past love. He disassembled the small machine, its parts so much simpler than his clocks, but its emotional weight so much heavier. He found the broken spring, a tiny, insignificant piece of metal, the one that had stopped the rhythm. He held it in his hand, a tangible symbol of the broken rhythm of his own life. He realized that for all his years of fixing things, he had never truly fixed the most important thing of all, his own heart. The metronome, with its simple, broken mechanism, was forcing him to confront a truth he had desperately tried to avoid. The world was not perfect. Time was not perfect, and neither was he. He was a man, not a machine, and it was time he stopped pretending to be one. Julian's work on the metronome was a slow, painful process. Every gear he cleaned, every piece he polished, was a memory he was forced to confront. He worked not with the detached precision of a professional, but with the tenderness of a man reliving a sacred past. He remembered giving it to her, her face lighting up with a joy that had nothing to do with its mechanical perfection, but with the love behind the gesture. He remembered the sound it made, a steady, soothing tick-tock that had been the heartbeat of their home. Now, as he held the broken pieces in his hands, the silence was deafening. He found the broken spring. It was a delicate, impossibly small piece of metal, but it had held all the power to stop the rhythm. He held it up to the light, a tiny, insignificant flaw that had rendered the entire machine useless. It was a mirror of his own life. A single, insignificant flaw in a car's timing system, something so small and so easily missed, had caused a chain reaction that had taken his wife's life. He felt a new wave of guilt, sharp and suffocating. This was his fault. He should have known. He should have seen it. His expertise, his entire life's work, had been useless. He saw his reflection in a small piece of polished brass. His face was a mask of grief, his eyes dark with the pain he had so long suppressed. He looked at the perfect clocks around him, their hands moving with an unwavering, relentless precision. He looked at the broken metronome in his hand, and he saw the truth. The clocks, for all their perfection, were a lie. They were a cage he had built around himself, a way to hide from the messiness, the unpredictability, the beautiful, painful chaos of life. The illusion of control was the heaviest weight he had ever carried, he whispered to himself, the words a painful, profound realization. He worked through the night, his hands moving with a desperate, feverish energy. He was no longer just fixing a metronome. He was confronting his own flaws, his own guilt, his own grief. He was a man standing on the edge of a precipice with nothing but a tiny, broken machine to hold on to. He saw the face of his wife in his mind, not as a memory of a perfect woman, but as a real, flawed, laughing and loving human being. He saw her smile, the way she would tap her foot to a rhythm only she could hear, a rhythm that was all her own. He found the replacement spring, a tiny piece he had in a small, unmarked box in his workshop. He had forgotten he had it. It was a piece from a different time, a different life. He held it in his hands, and with a precision born of years of practice, he installed it. He wound the metronome, his hands shaking. He set the tempo, a slow, gentle beat, the one he remembered from her practice sessions. He released the pendulum, and with a soft, almost inaudible click, it began to move. Tick, tock, a perfect, beautiful, imperfect rhythm. The sound filled the workshop, a gentle counterpoint to the relentless ticking of his clocks. It was a sound he had not heard in years, and for the first time he was not just hearing a mechanical beat. He was hearing a memory. He was hearing her. He was hearing her laughter, her music, her life. He was not trying to stop time, but to feel it. He felt the pain, the profound loss, but he also felt something new, something he had not allowed himself to feel in a long time. A small, fragile and beautiful flicker of hope. He realized that the memory of her was not in a perfectly preserved, broken watch, but in the living, breathing, imperfect rhythm of a metronome he had finally brought back to life. The next morning, Julian did something he hadn't done in years. He opened his front door and walked out into the world. The sunlight felt strange on his skin, the sounds of the city a symphony he had forgotten how to listen to. He crossed the street, the worn metronome clutched in his hand. He stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the massive mural on the wall. The imperfect clock, a few minutes behind, looked back at him, and he saw it for what it was, a beautiful, honest representation of life. A reminder that perfection was a myth, and that true beauty lay in the messiness, the flaws, the moments that didn't go according to plan. Mia was there, standing with a few of her friends, looking at the finished piece. She saw him, and her face softened into a knowing, gentle smile. He walked up to her, holding out the metronome. "It's fixed," he said, his voice stronger than he remembered. She took it from him, her fingers brushing against his. "I know," she said. "I never doubted you." She looked at him, not as a watchmaker, not as a man of perfect clocks, but as a man. And in that moment, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders that had been there for years. He stood with her, looking at the mural of the clock. He realized that his life's work, his obsessive need for control, had been a prison. He had been so busy trying to fix a past that was unfixable that he had forgotten to live in the present. The metronome in her hands, now a living, breathing machine, was not a testament to his control, but to his acceptance. It was a reminder that life, like a musical score, was not about being perfect, but about being in tune with the rhythm of your own heart. He was no longer a man made of gears, but of flesh and blood, of memory and hope. He realized that his wife's memory wasn't in a perfectly maintained watch or a clock that could stop time. It was in the broken, imperfect rhythm of life, in the small, chaotic moments, in the music she had made. It was in the feeling of the sun on his face, the sound of a city in motion, and the quiet comfort of a shared moment with a new friend. He looked at Mia, at the mural, at the world around him, and for the first time in years, he felt not a need to control, but a need to live. If this story moved you, you'll find many others here that might change your day. Join us, subscribe, and be part of this journey.